I'll set the stage talking about research capacity building and partnerships by just trying to answer, to start with, the question of why global partnerships and why capacity building for these global partnerships. And I thought the best way to answer that is to just use an example. And so I'm going to use an example from the work that Croatia and I have been doing over the last several years to illustrate the answer to this question. So if you look at these data, they come from a rural community about an hour and a half from where you are sitting. In this rural community, Croatia did a study looking at the prevalence of HIV in 14 high schools. She studied several thousand grade 9 and 10 students at these schools. And if you look at the prevalence of HIV infection in the boys in these schools, you'll see that the prevalence ranges from about 1% to about 1.8%, depending on age. So at the youngest age group, in the boys below 15, the prevalence is still 1%. The story of the HIV epidemic in much of Africa is captured in these data. The prevalence in HIV in girls at these 14 schools is a completely different picture. By age 15, already 2.6% of the girls have HIV infection. By age 17, 6.1%, and by age 19, the prevalence of HIV is 13.6%. In the oldest of the girls, the group of 20 and above, the prevalence is 1 out of every 4 schoolgirls. Remember, I'm talking about grades 9 and 10. Indeed, this is the driving force of the HIV epidemic, are these incredibly high incidence rates of HIV in young girls. And indeed, we now have seen over the last several years how central this group is to the global HIV epidemic. We're not going to achieve global HIV control, as has been declared by the United Nations, unless we can solve this problem. So in solving this problem, one of the things we are trying to do is to develop a novel technology. In 2013, we discovered a woman from KwaZulu-Natal, just near here, who developed a very powerful, broadly neutralizing antibody. I was talking to Zoe Mullen of the Lancet Global Health yesterday and telling her the story about this young lady. But you capture that in any individual, when you acquire HIV, you develop antibodies. Any person develops antibodies against HIV. The thing is that those antibodies will only kill that particular HIV. But there are these rare individuals who develop a broadly neutralizing antibody. Their antibody can kill 70, 80, 90% of all viruses from throughout the world. And one of those antibodies, and about 24 of them have been described worldwide, comes from here, KwaZulu-Natal, from a woman whose research code name is Caprisa 256. She has developed this broadly neutralizing antibody that is highly potent. Of all of the antibodies we've seen globally, hers is the most potent that we have. In addition, hers targets clade C viruses particularly. She's a primary school teacher, she's got 2 children. We identified her infection several years ago, but what is important was we were able to find the cell in her blood that makes this antibody. We were able to clone it, and we're now able to make this antibody, and we put it into monkeys. So in looking at all of that, we have to look at what does it take to do such a study. Well, it takes many, many people. Indeed, the research team involved in developing this antibody, which we hope we would give as an injection to young girls every 6 months to protect them from acquiring HIV, it involves hundreds and hundreds of researchers. There are over 30 laboratories involved in this research, and having to coordinate all of that from here in Durban at CAPRISA is indeed a huge challenge. But we can only make this happen because of these global partnerships, because we're able to get all of these individuals. So how are we able to even get all these global partnerships? We've got 4 different countries in Africa involved. We have over 200 researchers from throughout Africa involved in the study. It was made possible because we invested in the training that's required. We sent people to the US, they came back, they started running programs here. We have people from the US coming here. And you'll notice that some of the people sitting at the front table are even feature in one of the photographs in front of you. This is in our rural community that's about an hour and a half from here. We've had people come from the US like Tom Fleming and run courses where several hundred researchers from South Africa have attended. We've had people from Zambia come here to take courses and so on. So this whole initiative about bringing partnerships together, whether they are north-south, south-north, or south-south, that's the essence of it. But it's not just that we do so across countries. We also do so across generations. And in this example, Lynn Morris, who was our Fogarty trainee, was the mentor and PhD supervisor for Penny Moore. Penny Moore, in turn, was the supervisor and mentor for General Beeman. And between the 3 of them, they have published some amazing papers in Nature and Nature Medicine describing this very CAPRISA 256 antibody. So let me leave you with 5 key lessons that I have taken away from all of these experiences. The first is that training is simply not a one-off event. It's a journey. So this idea you can just run a workshop and that sorts the problem out is seldom true. Research training by itself is not enough. From my experience, you have to find a way in which you not only provide research training, but you also train leaders. You train leaders in science, in research, because every person you train will need mentorship, and that mentorship comes from tomorrow's leaders. The trainees learn as much, if not more, from fellow trainees than they do from their teachers. In research, a key component of what makes success is the social capital and the partnerships you build. Every one of your students sitting with you in a class is going to become a researcher in your field. They are tomorrow's linkages for you to build on. And that you've got to find a way in which to create the opportunity for those researchers who've been trained to go back into a supportive department, supportive head of department, and an enabling research environment, because if they don't, they'll simply leave and go to greener pastures. And finally, I'd like to make the comment that this whole idea that we can depend on foreign support is simply one that is not sustainable in the long term. We have to also build opportunities in country for grant funding support, because that is the stepping stones to build the future of a competitive research culture. So let me end on the note from the great Nelson Mandela. This is the year of his centenary. If he had been alive, we would be celebrating his 100th birthday. When he said that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. I wish you well in changing the world.
Sawubona, good morning everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Keith Martin, the Executive Director of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health, and I'm here with Dr. Quinton Eichbaum, Zoe Mullen, the editor of the Lancet Global Health, and Dr. Ashti Dubey-Prasad from our board or our committees. Before I proceed into my talk, I really, again, want to congratulate Dr. Suleiman and her team. What we see here today is really the tip of the iceberg. What happens underneath it, we all know, is a tremendous amount of work. So, Fatima, to you and your team, thank you very, very much for allowing us to be here and the excellent job you all have done. I'd also like to thank Dr. Peter Donker for his leadership and friendship over the last couple of years. I have learned a lot from you, and thank you very much for all of what you've done to really advance AFREhealth. I'd like to congratulate Dr. de Villiers and her team as the incoming president, President 2, and the first woman to hold that position. Dr. de Villiers, congratulations. Now, I think I was asked to be here really to share a little bit about our voyage at CUGH, because in many ways, AFREhealth and CUGH are actually twins, separated a little bit by time and space. But for the most part, our goals are the same, and we're just separated by a little bit. So what I thought I would do is just share our path at CUGH, and then also discuss a little bit about what we've done together so far, but look to the future and what we can actually do to be able to address the big challenges we all face. So this is us. We were created in 2008, and now we have 171 academic institutions around the world. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we work across research, education, service, and advocacy to improve the health of people and the planet. Most of our members are academic institutions, and many of you here today come from institutions that are part of CUGH. I should say that we also have a fantastic working group that Dr. de Villiers and Dr. Eichbaum co-chairs. So we created our secretariat, and the discussions we had yesterday at the council were very interesting. And what we found at CUGH, and I think our board recognized, is that without a permanent secretariat, without that central nervous system, it's virtually impossible to be able to operationalize and execute what you want to do. So we created that, as I mentioned before, in September 2012 with 4 people. And what we did is we charged a membership fee to be able to generate some funds. As they say in politics, if you don't have any money, you can't run, or more succinctly, no money, no runny. And then what we did is we focused on activities on research, education, advocacy, and membership. And those committees, which are made up of our members, mostly academics, work on those committees, volunteer on those committees to be able to do work there. We work with, obviously, Dr. Glass and the team at Fogarty and many other NIH institutions. We also run an annual conference, which I'll get to later on, and many of you have been generous and kind enough to present or attend that conference, and we created communications platforms. Now, you heard Dr. Chirambo this morning give a really wonderful analysis of the SDGs, and I just want you to think a little bit, maybe in a different way, that we don't necessarily look at global health through this lens. Most of us are in the medical field as physicians, nurses, or in another field, and we're obviously very focused on that space. But I think all of us would recognize when we saw Dr. Chirambo's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and all of what that means to the well-being of people, we know that there's a foundation in order to operationalize that. You have to have strong and effective public institutions, regardless of what country you come from, in order to be able to implement sustainably the solutions to deal with that. And that means we have to have an effective electoral system, a free media, an effective and strong judicial system, and independent oversight mechanisms. And all that means that we have to, I think, I'm a physician, but many of us are, that we have to think that we also have to include our non-medical disciplines in the global health enterprise upon which we're engaged. This is critically important, and we're struggling with this at CUGH, but we're trying really hard to bring in the political scientists, the business community, the engineers, the social scientists, those that can work with us to be able to implement the things that we've heard today and we'll hear in the future to save people's lives and improve their well-being. So what we did is and I think Dr. de Villiers said at the meeting yesterday that we're faced with a smorgasbord of choices, right? And that's a wonderful table of options. But unless we focus on a few things, it's very difficult to actually move the ball forward. We can get so diffuse that we can't really be as effective as we want to be. So what we did is we really focused on sort of 3 long-term priority and commitments. And this is what we'd love to be able to work with AFREhealth in the future. Capacity building in education, capacity building in research, and advocacy on issues that are important for our members, our institutions, and the issues we deal with. So what have we done so far? So far in the last couple of years, AFREhealth and CUGH, we've created the working group I mentioned with Dr. de Villiers and Dr. Eichbaum. We had a half-day satellite session at our conference this year, which was in New York City, and AFREhealth had a half-day session, but we brought in the nursing community for a half-day session before that to make sure that they were able to have a place to convene and work together. We created a capacity building platform that shall go live in the next month or 2, and that's a chance to be able to define and identify the training needs in institutions and link them up with trainers. So what we hope to be able to do in a very basic but effective way is align training needs with trainers. And we've also created all of our educational products are open access, and we invite you to share those with us so we can share them widely. Zoe Mullen has done a writing workshop and published webinars, and she did a fantastic workshop yesterday, which was more than fully attended, I believe. And one last thing is we've tried to find space for African researchers to publish. So Dr. Sewankambo was kind enough to be with Dr. Donker, co-editors of an edition devoted entirely to and by African researchers. So what we're trying to do at CUGH is work with you to create a bigger space for African researchers to be able to publish. I'll breeze through this because we're running out of time, but know that we've had LMIC or AFREhealth members as part of our conference, co-chairing our conference. Makariri and Dr. Sewankambo and Stellenbosch University have both been co-hosts, co-chairs of our conference. All right, that's our conference, and I just want to close by thanking you very much for your time. We at CUGH looking forward to working with you, but before I close, we want to tell the world about this conference, right? So I need you to smile, because we're going to put this on Twitter, right? And we're all going to share this with the world, so everybody around the world is going to know what an amazing group of people here at AFREhealth, right? Right on. Okay, that's the serious one, so let's wave, everybody. All right. Sibonga Gokulu, merci beaucoup, obrigado. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you. A real honor to be here with you today. I am very humbled at the convening and the quality of energy that led up to the organization, both from Peter Donkor, whose leadership has been felt for 2 years now and appreciated, and for Professor Suleiman, whose vision and orchestration of the specifics of this conference are evident to all of us. I'm going to shift a little bit into talking about the practical aspects of much of the work all of you in this room have been dedicated to for much of your careers. Standing up medical delivery systems, using existing infrastructure that is already in place, and trying to look for ways to add to and expand the service capability in and amongst the delivery sites that are already part of the system, and creating something that is more than what you started with, and just as importantly, looks at those elements for sustainability that are critical for that service to remain after your project, program, demonstration leaves. PEPFAR's impact on the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief is a platform that focused on a vertical disease, HIV, and tried to aggregate the service needs of a population in a delivery system largely that was more focused to acute care medicine responses. The lack of a continuity clinic expectation, the ability to follow individuals over time for a chronic progressive disease, to have laboratory support in place for that, pharmacy formularies and procurement distribution systems that enable that system to deliver the care on day 1 and day 3,000. PEPFAR's platform that was created did build all of those elements into the existing infrastructure sometimes, but often chose to create a parallel system of care which precluded in many instances the ability for that system to continue, and created, as a program was phased out, a scramble to pass that capability on to those who remained. Instead of it being a 15-year relationship that spanned the time of PEPFAR in that country, it became a quick scramble of months to years, 2 years at the most, for that transition to occur. It was difficult and remains difficult and remains a challenge in front of us. But what I'm focusing on really is trying to emphasize the fact that we have built platforms that now, with the advent of the individuals that we already have secured in care, the HIV-positive person, that we are now seeing that individual age and develop non-communicable diseases, high blood pressure, diabetes, coronary artery disease, and need to ask ourselves, are we going to take an approach that creates another service site for NCDs, or are we going to move our vertical programming into an integrated model that adds services to the existing and expands its ability to diagnose and treat NCDs while it continues to keep the pedal on the metal for HIV. I think that the disproportionate impact here in sub-Saharan Africa, just looking at the numbers for HIV, TB, malaria, NCDs are a problem that is already present, but not a problem that we characterize and quantitate with the rigor that we have with infectious diseases. And it is now upon us, as our patient populations in our vertical programming ages, to expand that service portfolio to include NCDs. I think that the workforce challenge that has been alluded to already is a real one. We have an inability to have the existing healthcare professionals expand to the need that is, as I say, already present. We need to think of creative ways that many of the people at this table and many of you in this room have done to expand the ability to identify, enter, and retain individuals in care. I think that the workforce pre-service needs, as they move back into their educational curriculum development, the AFREcare, AFREhealth hope with the MEPI-NEPI evolution really was an attempt to create a cadre in academic medical centers that appreciated and had the financing and support to pursue clinical support for medical students and nursing students as they graduate in clinical settings, so a clinical layer, but also that clinical layer learn the tools of clinical research, understand the role that EPI plays and surveillance in understanding what you're doing and where you're going with your work, so that your appreciation of the investment in the intervention results in a specific outcome that you can relate the investment to the outcome. That kind of rigor in understanding the orchestration of resources to deliver a product in a service becomes the challenge to complete in all of these settings. The workforce capacity alone is something that we need to hone down on and move to strategies that Slim was really eloquent in talking about, the long march that never stops. Medicine, in many ways, is about a baton passing and a colleague who finishes the work that you began. My career has been that very clearly to me. I have no doubt that the people in this room and those on the younger end of the spectrum will witness and watch as we move across a finish line that delivers a system of care that embraces people, keeps them as healthy as they can, and as their genetics and lifestyle catch up with them, is responsive to the needs that they develop. And I think that commitment needs to come from stronger relationships with ministries of health, looking at academic medical centers as a resource for collegial support and problem-solving support, as many of you have done in South Africa. That relationship with an academic medical center and a Ministry of Health is strong in many instances in this country. The Minister Matsaledi's leadership has been visionary in that regard, understanding the importance of the on-ground delivery system as the final interface with the people that they are concerned about reaching and allowing to benefit from the science that we already know. That partnership needs to be supported, and AFREhealth has really put the ground piece in place to build a foundation on which that support can come, not just from the local academic medical center, but we can share ideas and talent across medical centers within countries and between countries that allows for a true south-to-south synergy. And I believe that we have taken a large step toward that effort, but still have miles to go to realize it. I think that when we achieve the universal health coverage that our colleagues from WHO referred to, that the DG Tedros spoke to in his film, was a good description of what is a much more complicated system to deliver. It goes against the traditional vertical programming and silo programming that donors are dominated with. The new dialogue that needs to come, the diplomatic aspects that need to infuse the way we put program on ground, has got to be aggressively engaged with to re-challenge donors to allow for an integrative approach to come out of a vertical silo funding line. That requires a more sophisticated argument, and we still need to honor reporting lines that go back to those siloed programs. The reason is simply that the appropriators of those funds want to hear about how that money was spent, and the reason that Global Fund and PEPFAR have been able to keep and sustain an appropriator's interest in funding year after year after year is largely because of the stunning data we are able to show them in how that investment resulted in outcomes. It is the partnerships with academic medical centers and ministries of health that will be achieved. This is a wonderful beginning to that final lap of the journey that was started many, many years ago by many of you in this room, but I hope many of you in this room will benefit from the work that's been done and the work that needs to continue. I will end with that.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure the organizers saved the best for last. I was asked to talk about medical education in a South-to-South relationship, South-North partnerships for health systems development. However, I decided not to talk about medical education and thought that talking about health professions education would be a better alternative for reasons that will become clear. So, last year, in September 2017, a group of us Africans, except for Peter Piot, who was a loner in the group, we did come up with this Lancet Commission report, which was, as I said, published in September last year. This Lancet Commission report was focusing on looking at longer and healthier lives for all Africans. We did generate a very positive message that indeed Africa, by 2030, would, if we worked hard at it, that all Africans would enjoy better health at that time. Besides that, there is also a message at the bottom: think and look ahead. And I think we need to do that every day of the year and every year, to think and look ahead. Not just to do things because this is the way we've done them for decades. So that we can give our young people, as portrayed in this in that picture, value in life and look forward to enjoying healthy lives for a long period to come. And also systems that provide good support to the elderly, like that young lady you see, wherever she is in whatever context. If you haven't read the publication, what I showed you before was the report as it came out. However, this is the paper, or as it appeared in the Lancet series, and you can have a chance to look at it and see the path to longer and healthier lives for all Africans by 2030. Now, the topic I was given, which I changed to health professions, I could give the same talk in a different context, or rather, I could focus on the same topic in a different context away from here. So I thought that since we are here as AFREhealth, we should keep in mind the spirit of AFREhealth. AFREhealth should inform, or the spirit of AFREhealth should inform education of our professionals and the entire health workforce. What is the spirit like in AFREhealth? That Africa needs to provide visionary and strong leadership at various levels. Visionary and strong leadership. Secondly, AFREhealth must have a niche. Otherwise, people ask, and they will ask after a few generations, what was this all about? But they are also asking now, what is AFREhealth all about? What is our niche? Bringing all health professions together for a common purpose. That makes us somewhat different from all others. There's interprofessionality if you are bringing all these different professions together. Interprofessionality. We need, if we are going to work together as different professions coming together, we need to learn the science, the mechanics, and the ethics of interprofessional education, practice, and research. Those must be at the back of our mind whenever we are talking AFREhealth or discussing as an AFREhealth family. I can't help but pose the question, what is our theory of change as AFREhealth? If we are going to make a difference, we need a theory of change that will guide us regarding the inputs and the outputs and how we measure the impact that AFREhealth has. So for the leadership of AFREhealth, this is a question that needs to be answered sooner than later. What is our theory of change? Health professions are key to health systems strengthening. We all know that. Now, if health professions are important, we need to look at a number of things. There are many important considerations, like financing, like other resources that are required to strengthen health systems. But let's focus on health professions. And here I say, not doctors per se, because doctors will not make any meaningful impact if other professions are left behind. We need to work together to solve the many complex health issues that confront this continent. And we shouldn't just set out to do health professions education, but for what purpose? For what objective? To achieve what? If, as the minister said this morning, it is primary health care, let that be clear. Then we can design our education to fit the purpose. Training institutions, as has been alluded to, cannot work alone, whether they are universities, whether they are colleges of some sort, but they need to team up with the relevant government departments, funders, the general public, and other stakeholders. Since we are talking about strengthening health systems, we cannot afford not to think about health systems science. If we're going to do educational reforms that lead to strengthening the health system, we must impart health systems knowledge and skills to those being trained, whether in service or pre-service. And the training or the education should align with the anticipated needs of the health system in which those trained will practice or are practicing. And the content, of course, of that training should include things like systems thinking, health systems improvement, and so on and so forth. So as we walk out of here, for those who hadn't thought about it, we need to include health systems science in curricular reforms if the education is going to lead to strengthening health systems. This is my last slide. I also thought that we need to have or to develop our own metrics. A metrics that will help us finally to measure the impact of what we do. On the left-hand column, you see the kind of areas in which training should take place. Policies and guidelines. Developing policies and guidelines should not be something that is done haphazard. Increasingly, there is a science to developing policies and guidelines. There is need for planning, and we lack capacities in many of our countries for proper planning. We need to develop capacity for designing curricula appropriately and evaluate them, and also proper implementation of those curricula. Capacities need to be built in all these areas, followed by or accompanied by monitoring and evaluation for impact. While on the top row, we ask ourselves what types of health workers, in what quantities, in what is the quality, and that the training should be relevant. AFREhealth, what is the value add? We're sitting here. We've traveled to come and meet here, and we met last year. What is the value add that AFREhealth is bringing to the table? And also, not to forget the issues of equity. And finally, that the people being trained, we need to deploy them and retain them in order to strengthen the whole system. So while we educate, we must follow that with research across all those entities that have been put there. This continent is still poor in doing research on health professions education. We must do research on each and every aspect in this 5x5 table. I thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Those were indeed excellent presentations, and that really sets the scene for further discussion. Let me pose the first question to Professor Karim, Abdool Karim, but others can chip in. Your center, CAPRISA, and the research work, training, advocacy, and so on that you have done through that center and through your other positions within the university as a research vice chancellor and so on, have really been phenomenal and have been excellent examples of how the continent can actually use its sons and daughters to be able to add not just to continental or national programs, but to global programs. And you have described some of them in your own presentation. AFREhealth has representation from various parts of Africa. And we tend to fall into groups like Anglophone and Francophone and Lusophone, Arabic, and so on and so forth. And partnerships have tended to be along those lines. And also, partnerships have tended to be along historical lines. You know, those who align to Britain, those who align to Portugal, and so on and so forth. There's been less partnerships, collaborations, consortia, you know, communities of practice that cross those dividing lines. And yet, AFREhealth really would like to create that kind of platform. Could you comment on that?
Thanks very much for that question, Dr. Hakim. It's indeed sad that one of the hangovers of our colonial history has been the basis on which countries in Africa have aligned themselves with being Anglophone, Francophone, or Lusophone in terms of which was the colonial power in charge of these countries in the past. So I think part of breaking those barriers has been a challenge not only within Africa but across the world. And in establishing partnerships, I have found that language as a barrier becomes much less important and can be more readily overcome if the partnership itself is based on one key principle, and that is mutual respect. The moment you have two unequal players partnering with each other in a binary relationship, you immediately create an unequal relationship where one is dominant compared to the other. And that's just in the nature of what we do. South African researchers partnering with researchers in Ethiopia, for example, will have this kind of unequal relationship, an unequal basis of resources. But you have to look past that, just like you have to look past the language issue, and develop a relationship that goes beyond what the resources and the backing are, but really one about respecting each other and each other's contribution. And I think when we do that, the differences between whether we were originally colonies of France or Portugal or England will become less important. And I think that that's the key stepping stone to moving towards more productive partnerships across Africa.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question about training and how do we maintain mentorship and development for training and funding over the years. And let me ask both Eric Goosby and Nelson. For Eric, MEPI really began from PEPFAR funds for HIV, and it was you who envisioned a broader sense of education. So where will future come from externally? And Nelson, you're renewing and repurposing education in Uganda. What role will the government funding have to advance this professional education that you speak of?
Well, thanks, Roger. I do think that that is the challenge, the funding need. I believe that all of those who are already at the table need to continue to be at the table and need to better understand why it is in their interest to increase the support as the countries in which the resources are focused realize that the investment in their population's health is a priority. So domestic resources need to increase, donor resources need to stay steady at best, but preferably increase. And we need to put on top of that a value for money exercise. The reorganization of delivery systems that Minister Monsaledi spoke to, and the target of universal health coverage makes this a necessity. And I believe that the final leg on the stool, the private sector, I don't see them as a solution to most of it, but they are a dormant partner often in playing a role for their own employees and families, and also in looking at their expertise in mid-level management, procurement distribution type systems. They are expert at it and rarely engaged in allowing that expertise to come into the public sector. So it's about the partnerships, it's about the spaces between, strengthening, and a continued commitment to the march to UHC.
Is that the older schools get less resources because there's a tendency to cater for the newer schools. Government needs to think a little harder on creative ways on how to support education in general. For example, based on some tax system which should not put undue stress to the population, but should be reasonable and can be diverted to support education. I think we ourselves as health professions have also not played our part very well, in the sense that we haven't been very good advocates and showing the case why there should be increased funding from governments. So as part of AFREhealth and advocacy was mentioned on this panel, I think we need to take up the issue of advocacy very actively and see how to get more resources from government funding, but also look at some private funding as part of domestic sources.
Okay, thank you. Let me pose a question to Dr. Keith Martin. You have been a true friend of AFREhealth as an organization. You've opened up CUGH, as you showed in your own presentation, to AFREhealth, provided resources, provided opportunities, advocacy, and so on. Even though CUGH is also relatively recent as organizations go, you have the advantage, obviously, of having lots of resources and having much more established institutions contributing and being members of CUGH. AFREhealth is more recent and has issues with resources, etc. Nonetheless, as Slim has mentioned here, partnerships thrive best when there is mutual respect and when there is symbiosis, when there is bilateral benefits. At the moment, obviously, AFREhealth is in great need of a lot of resources and advocacy and so on. How do you see CUGH benefiting from AFREhealth? This is really aspirational, but how do you see CUGH benefiting from it?
Thank you, Dr. Hakim, for your question and kind words. We see, as you know, CUGH and AFREhealth, we are compatriots in this common effort. Our goal is the same, to improve the health and well-being of people, particularly those who are least privileged. So let me just suggest one thing on partnerships. There's a lot of institutions we know from high-income countries that have relationships and partnerships with those on this continent. It is not right, from our perspective, that institutions in high-income countries can go over, have research opportunities, training opportunities for their students and faculty, and then go home. There must be embedded in the partnerships, we feel very strongly, embedded in those partnerships, that there must be a long-term, durable, sustainable benefits as defined by the host institution on this continent that are baked in as a prerequisite for those collaborations. We from North America or from richer countries cannot simply go onto this continent and take and leave. We have to work together. It's morally wrong. So what we'd like to do is take the partnerships that exist now and your institutions, working with your colleagues overseas, tell those colleagues what you want, whether it's access to libraries, access to curricula, access to equal opportunities for research, access to training, whatever it is you want. Define those, share those, and demand those of colleagues overseas. I think that's the only way in which we can grow together. Otherwise, we don't, as you said, have a respectful, honest relationship that's going to be true to our mutual objectives. Thank you.
So let me ask you to go to the microphones with your questions and tee those up. And let me just ask one more question to the panel. I'm just thinking of if we were to meet here again in 5 or 10 years, we've talked about these innovations in professional health education. How do you see, there's so many new medical schools on the horizon or who started in the last few years. Are they going to adopt a traditional medical education, or do you see them coming in with professional education across the spectrum and innovation in that space? And I guess Nelson, Nelson or Slim might be the best to address this.
Well, the innovations, personally, I was very excited, and many of our colleagues who are in MEPI very excited regarding the innovations that came up during that time period. And these innovations were extremely relevant, very, very relevant. They took our institutions from one level to a higher level. And they helped us in some way to overcome some of the shortages that existed. For example, using e-learning would overcome to some extent the shortages of human resource, of textbooks, and so forth that existed in our institutions. So we should continue to innovate. We shouldn't stop here. And I think if we continue that way, our institutions will be in wonderful shape in another 5 years or so.
I'll just add one quick point to comments Nelson's already made, and that is that part of ensuring we train health professionals who are well prepared to take on the challenges in Africa is that we train them into how they can contribute as being part of the overall team. Because so much of the training we do these days are not in lecture rooms, but are actually at the bedside of patients or in settings where patients are facing the health challenges directly. And so how each of the different players come together, contribute their part, whether it's nurses, pharmacists, doctors, and so on, each of them plays a role. So I see that as being an important component of how we train the next generation.
Thank you. We shall take questions from the floor, but please feel free to pose your questions through the conference app. We'll be able to pick that up and direct it to the presenters. So we'll take, please make your questions short, maybe ask one question each. So 1, 2, 3, and then we'll get the panel to respond.
Yeah, my question is to Dr. Sewankambo and Dr. Goosby and Dr. Glass. I've spoken to each of you over the years about the issue of new medical schools, and I think it is an issue. New medical schools are opening, and I think Dr. Sewankambo was alluding that it's taking funding away from established schools. So I'm just genuinely interested, how do we navigate that conundrum? And we heard yesterday that funding that may be allocated may go again to the Mepi schools. So I've raised this question several times, and I think given that over 100 new medical schools are opening in Africa by some projections over the next decade, I'm genuinely interested and concerned, how do we allocate the limited, increasingly limited resources that are being put out there? Do we put all our bets on the established schools, or do we allocate some to the new medical schools as well?
Thank you, the presenters, fantastic presentations, and the topic North-South, South-North partnership is extremely relevant, and I've learned a lot. Think and look ahead. What is a theory of change? And all that has been said. Now, maybe to Nelson. You've given an example of Uganda, that new medical schools or new schools are being established. And we know the situation in many African countries that government funding is dwindling. And what actually we are seeing, when new medical schools or schools are being opened, there is what I may call an academic prostitution, because it's the academics who are moving from the old schools to the new schools, because we have not been able to train sufficient numbers. Now, in the morning, the minister said, if we talk in an environment like this one, the politicians listen. But again, I know the type of politicians that we have in many of our countries actually are either people that we have taught them, or we've been together in the medical schools. Now my question is, I believe they don't listen. Where have we gone wrong? Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Mash from Family Medicine and Primary Care at Stellenbosch University. So we've heard that the whole conference, I think, is about universal health coverage. And we've heard this morning from the Minister and some of you that primary health care is sort of the essential foundation for universal health coverage. And then we've also heard from many of you in this session that the partnerships are often built on single diseases and vertical programs where money is given to specific diseases in our context. And that now we're doing some sort of dancing around trying to use that money to strengthen health systems and particularly primary health care. But my question is, so what do we need to do to actually shift the partnerships and the funding that goes with those partnerships to directly strengthen education and research that will strengthen primary healthcare systems, and not trying to do it through specific diseases and vertical programs?
Thank you. The panel will respond to those questions.
Well, thank you for those questions. I think that I'll start with the last challenge, which I think is kind of at the core of concern. You have many years that have been focused on the traditional medical education of subspecialization. You have institutions that have aligned with that pattern of practice that goes back for centuries. And I think that payment reimbursement systems, as you move into developed settings, insurance companies, have disparities across the reimbursement spectrum that further reinforces the pressure to move towards subspecialization. I would like to emphasize that both are needed. It is not an either or. We need the primary care ability to cover the majority of diseases that we can do something about in outpatient settings, respected, honored, and reimbursed in a manner and fashion that makes the individual who's dedicated their life to that validated and puts them out of a struggle relationship with resources. The truth is that, and I heard it in your question, that we are being asked to do more with the same or less. And I haven't gotten that out of perspective. We are being asked to do more with less money. We need, as health professionals, to begin to infuse an element of indignation to that fact, to that disrespectful non-acknowledgement of the work that's in front of you, the work you're being asked to do, and the disparity with the reimbursement and the money available to do it. There's a power in those who are in front of those who need the service, the people that we serve, to say that this is not adequate, we do not have enough resources to do the work we know we can do, so people can benefit from the science we already know. The tragedy that tuberculosis presents in that mind, a disease that 6 months of treatment, 87% cure rate with that on drug-sensitive therapy, has not been able to stand up delivery systems that reliably get people in need of the diagnosis in front of the treatment. So I would say it all kind of comes back to us as health professionals grabbing the power that I believe we already have and acknowledge that health is a human right and that we, as those who are part of the continuum to deliver that service, need to be supported in that delivery, or we need to call foul with it.
Let me attempt to address the first two questions. Allocation of resources to the new vis-a-vis the older schools. I think it is, my understanding is very simple. We need both the old and the new schools. But we should not have one or the other at the expense of the other. The two need to be supported. However, what is happening in most of our environment is that there's opening of new schools in a very unplanned way. I did put in my 5x5 matrix, one of the things that needs to be done properly is planning for human resource. How many people of this type does this country need, in what period of time, and so on. And go ahead then to develop the education programs that generate those number of people. But schools are opened in a very uncoordinated way with no clear policies and guidelines to ensure that the right things happen. One of the things we do wrong, someone asked from Botswana, what is it that we do wrong? The people in the ministries, our colleagues, and many times they have been in the university as colleagues before they cross over. I think one of the things that we do wrong on both sides of the divide is universities plan alone and ministries plan alone. And we don't come together on a common platform to plan for human resource in the country. If that was done and done well, planning together, I think we will have a much better world. And so the universities would know which kind of health workers to train, in what numbers, over what period of time, while the government departments would know how much resources are required if the training is going to be accomplished. So how do we get over this issue of planning separately and instead come together? That is an issue that AFREhealth needs to be able to tackle. During the MEPI days, we in Uganda, the 5 schools working together, we advocated for opening a new medical school. And we at Makerere, the oldest institution, was at the center of this advocacy, meaning we needed a new medical school because what we had were not enough. And we're working together increasingly, collaboratively with the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health. One last point. The trouble is, even in our institutions, training institutions, there seems to be, from what I hear in different places, different countries, in institutions I shall not name, there seems to be madness in the house. In that, the institutions themselves wake up and say that they are able to train 100% increase in the number of students with the same resources. That's what I call madness of some, that we ourselves make the mistake in that respect.
We're right at time. I see we have 3 people standing. Do you want to just give a one-sentence question to the panel? And we have several questions that came in on the web. Could you do that? We'll close it out with these 3 questions from the floor.
Mosa Mshabela from UKZN. We have a lot of talent in Africa, but very few people who are excellent, who grow to become excellent researchers. A lot of the talent is locked in a lot of institutions where this talent is overstretched and burdened because of the workload. Now, I'm just wondering, how can collaborations help to alleviate that and unlock that talent?
Talent next.
Atene Sagi from the University of Jos in Nigeria, obstetrician and gynecologist. In my country, Nigeria, we currently have 44 medical schools, producing a little over 4,000 doctors every year. And at the present rate, over 2,000, emigrate every year after they graduate to other parts of Europe, the US, Canada, and the rest, and Australia and the rest. In training itself, the reasons why these schools are opening up is because parents want their children to read medicine, not because government wants to improve the health indices in any way. It's just the sheer demand from Nigeria. If you go to Ghana, I'm sure most of the students reading medicine there would be Nigerians. And the issue is there's no conversation between the schools, the government, and the different units. You have Ministry of Education on one side, Ministry of Health on the other side. You have the schools doing their own. It's not outcome oriented. So we need to have everyone in the same place to look at what the minister said this morning. Let it be outcome and impact oriented, such that when people finish, they have jobs. Currently they finish, no jobs, the states will not employ, and the people are all, emigrating. This is a big challenge, and I think that this is the right forum for us to be able to bring people together to do more with less. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Last question.
Yeah.
Sure.
My question is going to be short, is in line with what you just said earlier. My name is Abiola from UKZN. Professor Eric and Professor Nelson highlighted the deficiency in healthcare workers by 2030 to be like 3.9 million by 2030, and talked about the need for training health workers to meet this universal health coverage we are talking about. However, I'll give you one very practical example. In my graduating class, we have a social media group, WhatsApp. We are 173 in that group. And then the second group, which is the still same class, we call them the people in diaspora. We have 87 of 173 doctors are in diaspora. So my question is this: what is actually being done to retain these health workers being trained in Africa? Because we can keep advocating for training and training, but if we keep training and nobody stays within Africa to help meeting our target of universal health coverage, then I don't think the training is going to be of any benefit or any effect on the continent. So what efforts are practically being taken to ensure that we retain the health workforce within the continent? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll give a very quick response to the Joshua who asked the question on the app about rural health. Just talk to me in the lunch break. We can go in more detail. But basically, one of the challenges of trying to prevent the brain drain from rural areas of our medical professionals, part of that is the way in which we select our candidates for training, whether they're nurses or doctors. We've got to select, we've got to think more carefully about our selection criteria. We've got to create more opportunities for them to train in rural areas, and we've got to create the right kinds of incentives for them to go back there. And Musa's question on research excellence and the way in which partnerships can support that, I have found that receiving peer review from people with a completely different mindset is really important in enhancing the quality of what you're doing. And so partnerships help do that in ways in which they are often intangible. And just to add that one of the critical issues when we work in a small community is that it's very easy to become the big fish in the little pond. But you really grow when you become a little fish in a very big pond where there's lots of other people, and you begin to benefit from all of that, and you grow in stature and become one of the other big fish. So those are just two quick answers to those two questions.
So on just a couple of points. One is, first of all, putting political pressure for high-income countries not to actively poach healthcare workers out of low-income countries. We need to raise our voice collectively to stop that deplorable practice. Secondly, when we're talking about training, retaining, and sustaining healthcare workers across that platform, which I would argue would be the public health, primary care, and surgical platform, right? Because we're not going to be able to, we know, not be able to deal with the issue of trauma, injury, cancer amongst the NCDs that is vitally important to address. We not only have to look at the training that was mentioned before, but also the working conditions that people work under, the ability to have pay, security for themselves and their families, the ability to have ongoing education. And lastly, to Eric's point, he made an excellent point that we're trying to emphasize at CUGH, is for us, we're very privileged, of course, to be able to deal with people's lives at the time of their greatest fear and greatest need. And many of them are too worried, we know, about just trying to get care for themselves during that time. So our ability and power to be able to provide voice to the voiceless, to be able to powerfully speak not only to the politicians but also to the public about giving them an evidence-based pathway on what they can do and the rate of return on why they should do it, to not only ministers of health but ministers of finance. It's really important that we speak to them to give them the economic argument as to why they should support investments that are important to deal with the social determinants of health. Thanks.
I would just very quickly add one thing to Keith's comments. He mentioned the wage. One of the main motors for people to move is that they are not being paid a living wage. And our colleagues at all levels within the delivery system suffer from that. Healthcare workers often are asked to come in a voluntary relationship with the service portfolio, not just in a training period, but for the duration. It's not sustainable. More times than I can count, I've been in a dialogue with colleagues who have offers to go elsewhere, and the decision becomes one of a family and the larger needs in the family unit. And as long as we are looking at a wage that is lower than the basic needs of that individual and family, the gradient is going to go toward the higher paying resource. And it's hard to try to convince somebody with that disparity that that isn't the correct decision for their family. So a living wage is critical.
I think these issues are very complex issues, and sometimes or many times they are context-specific solutions which need to be looked at. And therefore, I go back to AFREhealth, that if we are going to make a difference, and if we want to make a difference, we really need to take up these issues very proactively and not just stop from the discussion in these conference rooms, but carry them back home and continue the discussion and engage whatever powers that be to cause a difference. It will be very interesting if at next year's forum, countries can report on progress being made on particular issues because of their engagement, continued engagement. I'll leave it at that.
So with those comments, it seems to me that this discussion and the questions that are still on the table demonstrate the importance of AFREhealth as a forum to carry on these discussions on health professional education, retention, the diversity of the workforce that's needed to improve health, the value of research and innovation in lowering cost and achieving greater outcomes, of putting prevention into practice as we think about the extending life expectancy in Africa and the need for prevention. I think this is really grist for the activities of AFREhealth as we go forward, and it ensures really important questions and dialogues. Some of you noted that we don't have any women on the podium, but next year's leadership of AFREhealth will involve 3 outstanding women. So perhaps the panel next year will be more diverse. With that, I want you to really thank the presenters, and I want to give Peter Donkor a chance to come up and just say a few words. But please give a round of applause for the presenters. Done such an excellent job. And Peter, I understand you have a few words you want to.
We'd like to take this opportunity to honor an individual who very early in his career treated patients infected with HIV/AIDS at San Francisco General Hospital when HIV/AIDS first began to emerge in the early 1980s. In 1997, he served in the National AIDS Policy Office at the White House, reporting directly to the President as a senior advisor. After leaving government service, he was CEO and Chief Medical Officer of Pangai Global AIDS Foundation from 2001 to 2007 and helped establish HIV services around the world, including setting up the Infectious Diseases Institute at Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. Shortly after being appointed U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator in 2009, he launched the Medical and Nursing Education Partnership Initiatives to strengthen human resources for health in Africa for addressing the HIV epidemic on the continent. His previous international work in lower middle income countries as an infectious disease physician gave him an in-depth understanding of the health system challenges faced by countries in Africa. He appreciated the centrality of a sustainable approach to the development of human resources for health if the fight against HIV was to be won. He understood the need to strengthen health professions education, research, and training infrastructure as prerequisites for the production of competent and socially accountable health workers who would stay and serve in their countries. He witnessed great strides many African health workers had made in their fight against the HIV epidemic with very limited resources. And he was encouraged by the sight of some inspirational health leaders from academia, research, and service institutions who saw hope in the face of despair. That their energy and enthusiasm in the face of adversity convinced him that they could even do better with additional resources. So he had a very unimposing and consultative approach that took him to several African countries to elicit opinions on how universities could engage in defining the national and global global plans for HIV care, prevention, and control. The MEPI and NEPI initiatives have transformed beyond our expectations the education, research, and HIV care in beneficiary institutions and their partners in countries of West, Eastern, and Southern Africa. New programs in health professions education, including emergency medicine and nursing, have emerged. E-learning has expanded exponentially. Simulation has revolutionized clinical skills. Training, interprofessionalism as an approach to better healthcare service delivery has undergone a resurgence. A leadership group emerged and expanded to form an expanded council, which has transformed into AFREhealth. As AFREhealth prepares to engage with institutions throughout Africa and the world to improve people's health on the continent, we feel honored to mobilize the entire continent to contribute in the realization of your original dream of an AIDS-free Africa. The remarkable outcomes of MEPI and NEPI clearly demonstrate your extraordinary vision, leadership, and courage, encourages faith in investing in health professions education in Africa. AFREhealth would not be here today without your sense of mission and dedication to Africa. We are indeed fortunate to call you a friend. In appreciation of your central role in the birth of this interprofessional continental body, I'm not done yet, a short line, we, the Governing Council and all members of AFREhealth wish to bestow on you today, 6 August 2018, AFREhealth's very first citation of honor and present you a memento as a lasting evidence of our appreciation. And with this honor, you become the first life member of AFREhealth. May I invite Professor Maswa to join me?
Okay, well, I'm overwhelmed with all of it. I wasn't, never been good at this end of the podium, but I'm touched. This was a real honor to work with you for all of these years, and to see the vision continue is very gratifying. But I will continue to walk with you as long as I can. I may be limping a little bit, but we'll get there. But thank you, what an honor, and truly thank you for it.